7 signs you're the problem, not them. Nobody wants to hear this. And that's exactly why most people never do. It's always easier to point at someone else. The friend who betrayed you. The partner who changed. The coworker who has it out for you. The family member who never understood you. And look, sometimes those people really are difficult. Sometimes the toxicity is genuinely coming from the other side. But here's the uncomfortable truth that psychology keeps circling back to, the one that self-help culture is terrified to say out loud. Sometimes you are the common denominator. Not because you're a bad person, not because you're broken, but because certain patterns you may not even see, are quietly poisoning every connection you have. And the most dangerous part? They feel completely normal from the inside. Today on Mindvale, we're going to walk through 7 signs, backed by real psychology, that you might be the problem in your relationships. Not to shame you, not to break you down, but because no one grows without first seeing themselves clearly. And if you make it to sign number 5, pay close attention. That one is the most convincing lie your brain will ever tell you about yourself. Let's go. Sign number 1. Every story you tell has you as the victim. Think about the last 3 conflicts you had with someone. In the version of the story you tell, to your friends, to yourself, in your own head at 2 a.m., who was wrong? Who started it? Who caused it? If the answer is always the other person, that's worth stopping on. Psychologists call this self-serving bias, the deeply human tendency to take credit for good outcomes and externalize blame for bad ones. We all do it to some degree. But when it becomes a fixed pattern, when every argument was someone else's fault, every broken relationship was someone else's doing, every failure had an external cause, you're not telling the story of your life. You're editing it. Research shows that blame shifting is strongly linked to an inability to regulate negative emotions. When people feel guilt or anxiety about their own role in a situation, redirecting blame onto others provides temporary psychological relief. It protects self-esteem by allowing the person to escape uncomfortable feelings about their own actions. In other words, the story where you're always the victim, your brain writes that story on purpose. It's a defense mechanism. It feels protective, but what it actually does is keep you locked in the same cycles, over and over, with different people playing the villain. Here's a brutal question to sit with. Is it possible that more than one person in your life has the same complaint about you? If the answer is yes, the common thread isn't them. Sign number 2. You can't sit with an apology. Apologies are interesting. Most people think the hard part of an apology is giving one. But there's an equally revealing pattern on the receiving side, and it shows up in people who quietly cause a lot of damage. Here's what it looks like. Someone apologizes to you, and instead of accepting it, you weaponize it. You bring up 5 other things they did wrong. You make them explain themselves further. You stay cold or distant or bring it back up 3 weeks later. The apology was never really about resolution. It became ammunition. Or here's the flip side. You apologize, but only after you've made sure to explain everything they did that made you act the way you did. That's not an apology. That's a negotiation. Relationship researcher John Gottman found that criticism and contempt are among the most destructive forces in close relationships, and contempt in particular is correlated not just with emotional deterioration, but with measurable physical health decline in both partners. When you cannot cleanly give or receive repair, when every attempt at resolution becomes another battle, you are not someone who wants peace. You're someone who wants to win. And people who want to win more than they want connection will eventually find themselves alone, surrounded by the wreckage of people who tried and stopped. Accountability isn't weakness. It's what keeps relationships alive. Sign number 3. You accuse others of the things you actually do. This one is uncomfortable. It's also one of the most well-documented phenomena in all of psychological research. It's called projection, and Sigmund Freud was among the first to describe it. Here's the mechanism. When you have a quality in yourself that you find threatening or unacceptable, your brain sometimes takes that quality and assigns it to someone else, unconsciously, so you never have to look at it in yourself. Projection is a defense mechanism that involves attributing one's own unwanted thoughts, feelings, or characteristics to another person. It often occurs on a subconscious level, meaning individuals might not be fully aware they are doing it. People engaging in projection may genuinely believe that the feelings they are attributing to others are actually originating from those individuals. So the person who constantly accuses their partner of lying is often the one lying. The person who says everyone is out to get them is often the one sabotaging. The one who calls everyone else manipulative is frequently the most skilled manipulator in the room. You can test this on yourself right now. Think of the trait you most frequently criticize in others. The thing that makes you angriest when you see it in someone else. The behavior that makes you immediately think less of a person. Now ask yourself, honestly, is there any version of me that does that? If you felt a flash of defensiveness just now, that's your answer. Sign number 4, you keep score. There's a particular kind of relationship hell that develops slowly, quietly, and almost always goes unnoticed until it's too late. It doesn't look dramatic. There's no shouting, no betrayal, just a slow accumulation of receipts. You remember everything. Every time they canceled. Every time they didn't show up the way you needed. Every time you did something they didn't acknowledge. And you hold it, quietly, not letting it go. And when the moment is right, usually in the middle of an unrelated argument, it comes out. But remember what psychologists call the relationship scorecard is when a relationship devolves into a battle over who has screwed up the most, each partner using the other's past mistakes as ammunition rather than working through actual present-day problems. The issue is that by choosing to stay in a relationship, you are implicitly choosing to accept that person's prior history. If something truly bothered you, it needed to be addressed at the time. But there is a difference between honesty and brutality dressed up as honesty. And the easiest way to tell them apart is this: who benefits? Genuine honesty is delivered with care at the right time with the goal of helping someone. Brutal honesty is delivered when you feel like it, regardless of timing, with the unstated goal of being right or powerful or unbothered by social consequences. Psychologists note that people who consistently use criticism as their default communication style, criticizing appearance, actions, or accomplishments often erode the self-esteem of those around them over time. What starts as feedback becomes a persistent environment where the other person begins to doubt their worth and lose sight of their own strengths. If the people in your life consistently feel worse about themselves after talking to you, that's not honesty. That's damage. And calling it a personality trait instead of a behavior pattern is how it never gets addressed. You don't have to choose between honesty and kindness. The most emotionally intelligent people in the world are both. If you've convinced yourself that isn't possible, what you may actually be protecting is your right to hurt people without consequence. Sign number 6, you don't actually listen, you wait to respond. There's a specific kind of conversation that feels like communication but isn't. You're both talking. Words are being exchanged. It looks like a discussion. But one person, maybe you, is not actually listening to what the other person is saying. They're building a counter-argument. They're waiting for a pause so they can correct something. They're thinking about how the other person is wrong. They're planning their next point while the other person is still mid-sentence. Psychologists observe that people who refuse to address issues or genuinely engage with the other person's perspective during conflict are often more invested in asserting dominance than in resolving the actual problem. You can learn a lot about someone's character by watching how they handle moments where they might be wrong. Real listening, the kind that actually repairs relationships, requires something most people underestimate: the willingness to be changed by what you hear. Not just to hear the words, but to actually consider that the other person might have a point, that your understanding of a situation might be incomplete, that their experience of you might be different from your experience of yourself, and that both can be true at once. If every conversation you have ends with you more certain than when you started, you're not having conversations. You're delivering monologues with audience participation. Sign number 7. You've heard the same complaint from multiple people. This is the simplest one, and somehow, the hardest one to sit with. One person complaining about your behavior could be them. Two people, maybe a pattern in the relationship. But three people, different relationships, different contexts, different seasons of your life, all arriving at the same observation about you? That's not a coincidence. That's data. Psychologists note that one of the clearest red flags in relationship dysfunction is when multiple people in someone's life, friends, family members, partners, independently raise the same concern. Most people in this situation rationalize it away, but the convergence of the same complaint across different relationships is one of the strongest signals that a behavioral pattern exists. The responses to this, from someone who is the problem, are predictable. They're all just sensitive. They don't understand me. Those people were toxic anyway. I've grown since then. Maybe some of that is true. But here's what research on self-awareness consistently shows. People who recognize patterns in their own relationships and take genuine responsibility for them are far better positioned to grow out of those patterns than those who dismiss the feedback and walk away assuming the next situation will be different. It won't be different. Not until you are. The complaints that sting the most are usually the ones that are the most accurate. And the moment you stop defending yourself long enough to actually hear them, that's the moment something real can change. So here's where we land. 7 signs. 7 patterns that feel completely normal from the inside, because your brain was built to protect you from seeing them. The victim narrative. The inability to close the loop on conflict. The projection. The scorekeeping. The cruelty rebranded as honesty. The listening that isn't listening. And the feedback you keep receiving and keep ignoring. None of this makes you a monster. Every single person on this planet has lived inside at least one of these patterns at some point. The difference between someone who grows and someone who doesn't isn't whether these patterns existed. It's whether they could see them. Self-awareness is not comfortable. It is one of the hardest things a human being can actually do. To sit with the possibility that the story they've been telling about themselves might not be completely true, that they might be someone who causes pain without meaning to, that they might need to change. But that discomfort, that is not a threat. That is the beginning. The people who transformed their relationships, their friendships, their lives, they didn't do it by finding better people. They did it by becoming a better version of themselves first. That work is available to you. Right now. Today. This has been Mindvale. If this one hit differently, if you found yourself getting defensive at any of these signs, that reaction itself is worth sitting with. Drop a comment. We read every single one. Until next time, look inward first.